because if we don't feel safe, we're going to hold on to the attentional system to try and find safety. To the extent that we feel fundamentally safe at the root, the attentional system softens and it opens up. It opens up into like the fundamental innocence and the not knowingness of like true nature. So there's a really deep relationship there between early childhood, trauma, developmental trauma, what the Christians would call original sin. Like the original sin, if you will, is that inherited trauma that we haven't managed to clean up.
Welcome to the Stay Grounded podcast. I'm your host, Raj Jana, co-founder at Liberate, and it's my mission to help you become the most grounded, loving, and authentic version of yourself that you can be. Each week, I interview guests in the fields of mindset, spirituality, and emotional well-being. My brilliant guests share their tools, tips, and unique perspectives to help you develop the skills you need to show up for the people that matter most in your life. Now let's dive in. Yo, what's up everyone, and welcome to this beyond incredible episode of Stay Grounded with my new friend, Dr. John Churchill. So I was introduced to John through a mutual friend, and the first time I met him, he was just speaking to a depth of understanding around the complexity of consciousness, the nature of healing, how to do the inner work, how to ascend as a human, how to be a human in a way that I'd never met anybody explain. And as I started researching him and understanding who he was, it became pretty. I'm just going to read a few things off of his bio that I found online. But John spent several years as a Buddhist monk at the Samye Ling Monastery in Scotland. He spent 15 years training and teaching Great Seal meditation in an Indo-Tibetan Mahayana lineage under the mentorship of the late senior Western teacher, translator, respected author, and clinical psychologist, Dr. Dan P. Brown. He's a founding member of the Integral Institute, led by esteemed transpersonal integral philosopher Ken Wilber. He's received advanced training in attachment theory, hypnosis, positive psychology for peak performance, and so much more. He's been on a path for decades, holds a doctorate in clinical psychology from William James College, and is a practitioner of traditional Chinese medicine. He really is one of the teachers of our time. And I felt so grateful to have this conversation with him, because John has this incredible ability to take complex topics and bring them back to everyday application, and how we can truly learn to create more safety in our bodies, to increase our level of attunement and felt sense of love, to how to actually heal those wounds of not feeling seen, which was a big topic of conversation on this week's podcast. Me personally, my core wound, if I had to think of one, in the last 5 years has been healing the not feeling seen wound. And to hear John go in such incredible depths, leveraging all different branches of psychology, and contemplative practice, which I really appreciated the difference. He really brought back the deep awareness of our internal capacity to be our own therapists and how to actually do that. But as he was going down that, I was just like, yes, John, because what he's teaching is so empowering. John stands for the truth, which I also stand for, that we are our own healers, and we might be walking each other home, but ultimately we know how to rise above all of these constructs and wounding and limitations that were put on us, imprinted on us by society at large. And so I hope you enjoy this conversation. It was one of my favorite to record this year. And John talks a lot about the training he's opening up towards the end of the podcast. And he's taught some really insightful nuggets of wisdom towards the end. So make sure you listen all the way through. And I'm just so grateful that you're here, that you're listening to this. This is one of the last episodes of the year. And I hope you're taking this time to look back on 2024 and just really count your blessings for how amazing it was. Thank you for being a part of this podcast journey and unfolding. And without further ado, here is the most amazing Dr. John Churchill. Enjoy. John.
Raj.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
God, I ever feel like every conversation I've had with you has just been such medicine because of the depth of mastery you've devoted yourself to for yourself. Mm-hmm. So I just want to thank you for doing so much of that, like your own deep dharmic exploration, because I can feel the sincerity, and I can feel the humility, and I can feel the authentic service that you're on a mission to inspire and really embody. So I feel super grateful for all the time I have gotten with you, and a deep, deep, deep privilege it is to sit here and to have you all to myself.
Let's have some fun
for an hour, and to take us down some rabbit holes.
Sure.
And I was really thinking about, there's so many directions we can take this, right?
Mm-hmm.
But one thing that just was intuitively coming through for me was just this collective sort of energy thread and signature that I've been feeling across the board, especially in some of the communities that I'm a part of, the communities that I serve, is this nature of not feeling seen.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that there's so much in that, right? There's the feeling of not feeling seen, then there's a belief system attached to that, and there's experiences in life that shape our psyche.
Sure.
What's actually happening inside of that paradigm that feels so I don't know if to call it, like, it keeps you stuck. Like, I even think about my life, like I've felt that wound for so many years, and I tried working on it and working on it and working on it, and it always felt like I couldn't actually get to the end because it felt just endless. So I'm curious if you have anything. I mean, I'm sure you have a lot to share, but I'll just pause.
Yeah. Well, what you're describing sounds a little bit like a hall of mirrors, like a mirror reflecting a mirror reflecting a mirror, and you can kind of never get there, right? And so, of course, part of being seen is about mirroring. As human beings, we go through stages and levels of development, and each stage of development has a particular quest, if you will. And the earlier stages, obviously, we're not so conscious, so they are downloaded to us. And Western developmental psychology has done a lot of research on this. So actually, we can be quite precise. And really what we're talking about here is the attachment system. So the attachment system is the earliest it's almost it's biological as well, in the sense that if we don't get good attachment, like really good attachment, we die, right? So the studies done with, God forbid, little monkeys, where they give little monkeys something to hold on to when they're really young and not, and the ones that don't just wither and die.
Wow.
Right? So we have deeply conditioned inside of us, even on a biological level, to want to feel matter like the mother. Even if the mother is just actually a wire figure of a monkey, it's still something to hold on to. So what the attachment system does for all of us is that when we're really young, the experience of being held and the experience of feeling safe, that is internalized then as an ability to kind of feel safe and trust the world. So the first level in the psyche, so if we were talking about Indian psyche, this would be the Muladhara chakra, the root chakra. In Western psychology, we would talk about this as the basic fulcrum of development. And of course, all fulcrums are built on top of that foundation, right? So if you don't feel safe, that's going to reiterate all the way through the stack. And so to the extent that you trust the world, but also to the extent that you trust yourself and your own internal experience and your ability to quest into the world, that's related to how well you internalized that first function.
Yeah.
And in the psychology of religion, we can look at the relationship between that most basic level of development and how people conceive of a deity. Because when you and I, when we were that little, mom and dad were basically gods and goddesses. So that level, that first experience of relationship, of what some of the psychologists called object relations, that earliest relationship with this huge figure, if it was super positive, then the person is more likely to have a super positive conception of the divine. And if it's negative, they're more likely to have a more crude, vengeful kind of God, right? So it affects If you're kind of a spiritual religious person, it's going to affect how you conceive of the universe. And anyway, it's just going to affect your level of like trusting your life journey. So that's the first function, is like to feel safe, which we all need. And that's also why trust or faith is understood to be the most important mental factor in development. I mean, if you think of your life right now and reflect upon it, what extent would you say trust versus mistrust has been a part of your journey?
It's been everything.
It's been everything.
It's been everything.
Right.
It's the lens I've
Right.
seen the world through. And it's taken so much energy and effort and time to recalibrate that base layer,
Sure.
the foundation.
Yeah.
And I guess that's the piece I get curious about, is like, why is it so, is it that we're not thinking about it properly? Or is modern day psychology, healing arts, transformation, not thinking about the problem in the right frame? Is that why it's so difficult to like reestablish something
Like that?
Yeah.
That's a great question. I think part of the problem with Western psychology is actually where it is developmentally itself. So we can get to that. Let's hold on that question.
It's a whole nother
because the ability to think developmentally and hierarchically is itself a level of development. So one of the challenges we see in our culture is actually psychology itself is at a level of development where it isn't yet an integrated psychology. So roll the dice, go to a therapist, and who knows what kind of therapist you're actually going to get, because it's not yet an integrated body of knowledge, right? So it's a crapshoot, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So first thing was like safety, right? Now safety is then followed by attunement. So what's the difference between the two? Well, if you're a little baby and you're being held by your dad or your mom, there's a difference between being held and dad and mom is on a phone, right? So you feel safe, you feel secure, but you don't necessarily feel felt. So what's the difference here? So if you can imagine, can we talk about energy, right? Like if you can imagine you're holding an infant, and if I'm feeling into this infant, this baby, you can imagine like little tendrils of the subtle body going inside that infant and essentially helping the infant organize their own nervous system. So an infant uses its parents as an outsourced source of organization for the nervous system, which is why you see an infant when they tantrum, and the mom or the dad is but you really have to get in there with your being.
Yeah, with your presence.
With your presence. Okay, so attunement has got to do with how deeply do you feel felt. Now that's internalized by your ability, by my ability, by our listeners' ability right now to feel their own inner experience and organize it. So what do I mean by organization? I mean, if you're feeling anxious, that's a kind of like a discoherent, it has no like organization to it. When you're feeling stable and at peace, your nervous system has a sense that the electricity is kind of running in an organized way. So disorganization versus organization. And so we all internalized that. And so the skill, ability, the default ability that you had before you started on your journey was basically you feel yourself the way that your parents felt you. That's pretty so we tend to think of ourselves as like individual beings, but actually the self is a relational being. It was built in relationships. It is relational. And so even how you right now are feeling yourself and our listeners, that is from relationships that we've internalized.
Wow.
And then if you've had wonderful friends and lovers, then hopefully they help us like deepen that capacity for attunement. And then you have certain practices, like certain kinds of mindfulness or somatic experiencing, essentially are helping to rewrite the ability at that particular fulcrum of development to organize and attune ourselves,
Wow.
right? So you got safety, physical safety, leads to trust, and attunement, the experience of feeling felt, leads to the ability to deeply feel our own experience.
Whew, John, like
Yeah.
there's so many, I'm like feeling what you're saying with such depth, because I am like, it so much makes sense.
Well, and no doubt you and our listeners, so much of the journey in the beginning when you realize that you're suffering, because part of the journey, it's like the journey of the Buddha, at some point you have to be like, oh, this isn't great, right? Before that, you're in denial and nothing happens. But the first step of recognizing what the Buddha called dukkha, or dissatisfaction, essentially what you're recognizing is multi-generational trauma inside of you.
And
Because,
yeah. Well, that's the piece that like I'm clicking, because it's like trauma, and maybe this is also, I'd love your definition of, because even the way you just described the passing down of trauma, it's like, it's truly like you're passing down your nervous system.
even our nervous system. So even the idea that it's your own nervous system. See, so look, higher up the stack, part of the dysfunction is thinking that that you are an isolated individual, individuated self. That's true, but it's also, if you get closer in, that's made up of all that information passed down through genetics, epigenetics, and culture. So you are a we.
Yeah.
Right? And to the extent that we recognize that, not only I think it's easier to heal, but it's also easier to begin to mature into the kinds of people necessary to heal a planet.
Wow. Yeah.
Because you and I, carry our lineages. We are our lineages.
Yeah.
Right? Like maybe if we were in a different culture, we would be using different language that would even acknowledge that. As I like to say, English is a great language for invading cultures, right, and enslaving them, right, and building machines as well. It's a great language for that, but it doesn't express in our language the fact that maybe you are a we and I'm a we. You're a representative of your ancestors, and I am a representative of my ancestors.
I think this comes back to what you mentioned earlier, like integrated psychology. There's a lack of embodiment in the world of like understanding this. There's a lot of like talk and understanding and study.
Yeah.
But to like know it and to feel it and to be able to recognize it in self and recognize it in others, like it takes a completely different language. This language may not be English, but it's like a felt language.
It's language. But the point is that really applying these things in a deep way. Yeah. That's what the contemplative traditions did. So there's a big difference between going to therapy and trying to resolve this in therapy, which is like a best 2 hours or 3 hours a week. And then you got to be privileged enough to afford that. There's a difference between that and doing it inside your own psyche, the very same thing, 2 hours a day yourself.
Totally.
So if we can take the understanding of the contemplative technology, and if we can take the understanding of human development and we apply the contemplative skills to the developmental healing, that isn't to say that we don't need therapy, but you can own the process yourself then.
There's a deep empowerment in activating your own awareness.
For sure.
Right? Like your awareness is yours. It's
that's right.
It's your,
yes,
and the more you awaken it, the more you have to reach out to access, to lean on.
Yeah.
It becomes your safety blanket, and it's like the more the contemplative, reflective practices are in place, you end up at a place where you are your own savior in the most beautiful way.
So the maps are psychoactive. And what I mean by that is having a developmental understanding means that then you realize that you can take care of yourself for the next 80 years. Meaning, if you understand the stages of development and you understand it, like right now, if something is happening inside, where it's coming from, what's this level, and you understand what's the appropriate way of addressing that inside yourself, then, as you said, you become very empowered and very confident that you can actually complete the journey of healing, of becoming an individual, and even transpersonal development, meaning that actually the journey that the great sages have gone on is something that you and I can go on, everybody can go on, and even complete in a lifetime.
Something's coming through. I'm just going to trust it. Like, there's an era of victim that's present in the world around not embracing the self-empowered nature of what you're speaking to. Like, can you speak to the collective, maybe like
I think, yeah, the main problem, well, we're the mainstream of our culture right now is at a particular level of development. And that one of the shadows of that level of development is victim chic. So even like that whole way of framing things is itself, because every stage of development is going to have strengths and it's also going to have shadows. And so the real problem here is a lack of human development needs to become a part of culture as much as mindfulness has.
Yeah.
And it's not, because if it was, we would be asking ourselves more precise questions about the nature of people that we're going to be voting into office, for instance. We're going to ask ourselves, like we would be able to see in a much clearer way where dysfunction is. And of course, I would imagine that that there are folks that wouldn't like us to see that, particularly when it comes to power, like the people who actually control power, because it tends to be that people who are interested in power attracts the kind of people who are interested in that and interested in maintaining power. And if we had a deliberately developmental democracy, that might not be, that's going to be more difficult for them to hold on to.
One of the things that I was really feeling into around just our wounding and all of it, if I have a deep resistance to feeling my own shame and being with my own shame and accessing my own shame, it's easier to manipulate. It's easier to control.
All these
things. And right, so when I think about the wounding of not feeling seen, or these wounds that we carry in our lives, like there's almost like you're right, like we don't, like, at least I can see how a liberated society is a society that just can't be controlled, because the thing that controls people is fear, and the fear of feeling all the different elements that we don't want to feel.
Absolutely.
And when we don't have that to be afraid of, there's nothing to be afraid of.
Yeah, we have, within the language of the traditions, the kind of the ancient traditions, we have essentially monetized samsara. So that wheel of multi-generational trauma, and it's described as a wheel because that's how compulsive addictive processes work. So rather than focusing on reversing it, we focus on, but how can we monetize it? Because it is an addictive process. And that's true in basically nearly every single industry. Now, granted, there's alternative medicine and there's alternative media, but generally, if we look at the nature of the wheel, the nature of the clickbait attentional economy on one hand, and how pharmaceutical companies work, it's really essentially basically facilitating deeper levels of ingraining this multi-generational trauma.
Wow.
That's just because it's easy money.
Yeah.
It's easy money. And it's also repeat customers, right?
Yeah. I mean, the entire model must evolve if we all evolve.
Yeah, well, I think we shouldn't go down there. But I think the whole thing around AI is an opportunity for the wheel. AI will speed up the wheel exponentially. So it's an amazing opportunity to set things going in a completely different direction. However, it's also an amazing opportunity to drive as fast as we can towards a brick wall, because the very algorithms with which industry is currently organized are those algorithms of essentially suffering.
Of wounding, yeah. And I want to come back to the stages that
Yeah, I
you're
do
speaking
too.
to, because what's beautiful, well, no, I love that we went down this little scenic route, because what we were able to now say is like doing this work, coming back home, being able to heal those different layers, whether it's the safety, the attunement, and then I'm really excited to hear the deeper layers. These layers are what allow us to live the most fulfilling, authentic, expressed, liberated, connected, intimate lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that are free of all these paradigms.
They allow for sustainable happiness and sustainable healthiness and sustainable holiness, right? Without having to go to, without,
needing to go outside of you.
Without needing to go outside of you.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
So, okay, so then we
back to the story.
We have the attunement layer, or the story.
Yeah, essentially safety, and then we have attunement, right? And in some ways you could equate attunement, if you're going to use Eastern systems, to the second chakra related to water, because it is a watery kind of feeling felt is watery, as opposed to feeling safe, which is earthy, right? And what we can look at is that the dysfunctions related to each of these ones, as we kind of like, so nearly all psychopathology is particularly related to the dysfunctions of these lower stages. They cause massive amounts of suffering on our planet. So the third aspect of this attachment system, I think, is a little bit older, because it's related to being seen. Right, so if you can imagine little Raj, little Johnny on the playground, right? And little Raj turns around and he sees his dad, and his dad is on his phone. Or little Raj is climbing this, he's like, look at me, he turns around and he experiences himself being seen. Now, of course, that can happen earlier on by just like seeing, when you're an infant lying there and someone's eyes are going to be massive, parents looking over you into the crib, like seeing you. But we're talking about being seen as a self, right? So to be seen as a self, you've got to have some stuff going on, right? Whether you're into art or whatever it is that you're doing. And then when you turn around, you recognize that you're being seen. And as my late mentor, Dr. Dan, used to say, seen with expressed delight, right? Like, oh, wow, Raj, you're really into painting your walls, right? Or whatever else, whatever it is, right? So to the extent that you experience being seen, then tags a sense of value to what's intrinsic for you.
What's intrinsic, yeah.
As opposed to only tagging what isn't intrinsic to you. So let's say if I light up whenever you do your homework well and get good grades, but I don't light up when you're showing me the music you're playing on your little ukulele, then actually perhaps the intelligences that are most intrinsic to you and your soul are then not being valued. And so what happens is you will slowly make a journey from here to here, right? So that you're going to get fed by my value, but in doing so, now you're becoming inauthentic, right?
Yeah, yourself, and
that's that level of then not feeling seen,
unless I am inauthentic.
Yes, I mean that's generally if the thing of not experiencing being seen is feeling that you're living, the byproduct of that is you're living an inauthentic life to some extent because you are valued for something else, right? And there's, of course, depending upon the community you're in, the family you're in, you could be valued for work, for achievement, for sports. You could be valued for being a thief.
Got a question.
Yeah.
On that piece, so in the same way that the nervous system imprint is passed down based on the parent's sort of nervous system.
Yeah.
In this stage,
sure,
if let's say my mother or my father, let's just use my father for an example,
Sure.
as a child wasn't seen
Sure.
because he grew up in a poor Indian family that had very specific ideals that just did not have the capacity, the language, the ability to see him.
Sure.
Is it an imprinting of him not seeing me in this lifetime, or am I actually carrying his sort of wounding around not feeling seen?
Both.
Okay. Yeah, can you tease that out? Because I think I'm interested in how much of it would be my lifetimes, or would it be, and do all multi-generational trauma patterns pass down through the same ways, through the like if the nervous system is getting imprinted onto me, is that also being imprinted onto me? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well,
Or is it the wrong
maybe.
question?
Well, let me fill in a little bit. I mean, there's also a level of your soul not being seen. So that's even deeper. And that's why there's so much projection, particularly in India, on the guru. Right? I mean, it's a very Indian thing, right? But really what's going on there is like projecting onto somebody else the fact that they can see your soul, which is even deep in some ways. Is like it's an even deeper thing. It's like can you see like the essence of who I am as a right? So not only is one injured because, let's say, you're not valued for maybe some of your intrinsic intelligences, but there's an even deeper level, which would be like not actually, your soul isn't recognized. And if your soul isn't recognized, you are much less likely to recognize your own soul. And what do I mean by that? Like, to recognize that you are a being, that you have beingness, right? That you're not just your skills and you're not just your intelligences, but you actually have a fundamental essence. So this is where not only is it like being seen as an individual, but the cultural, how connected is the culture or that family lineage to spirit even.
Do you need to be, in order to begin alchemizing this wound, does it require being seen by others? Or is there an element of seeing self, or are they both one and the same?
Well, the attachment system itself, so if we think about what happens in therapy, what's the common denominator of every single therapeutic approach?
The common denominator, there's another person.
Basically, there's another person there for 1 hour, hopefully giving you their undivided attention. Right? Now, of course, there's all kinds of various therapeutic approaches within that, but even just having somebody there, like, interested in you, can be profoundly healing. So the attachment system, though, isn't so much about if there's somebody there giving you their undivided attention. It's also about whether you've internalized that. So it's actually the internalization of the relationship and not the relationship itself. What does that mean? Well, it means, for one thing, you could have somebody who received very little, right? But a few occurrences where it was so deep, they were like, I'm holding on to that. And then remembering that inside of themselves. So if you think of stories of some people who have gone through terrible trauma, and yet for some reason they didn't develop personality disorders, and they were able to thrive and flourish, was because that gift was given. My mentor used to talk about a study, I think it was that he was involved in I think it was in New Orleans. It was essentially Sorry about the details, but I'm going to go into the details. Essentially, it was an orphanage that turned out to be run by pedophiles.
Oh, no.
Now, in this orphanage, there were two groups of kids. There were groups of kids who came from large, poor families that couldn't afford to take care of the kids, but they could go home on the weekend and stay with the family. So these were kids who were loved, but their parents couldn't afford to take care of them. And then there were abandoned kids. And basically he said that it was like super clear that the kids, and both sets of kids were evenly abused. The kids who had the family, even though it was on the weekend and it was like they didn't get a lot, no significant psychopathology other than what you might expect. And those who didn't have that all had personality disorders, right?
Wow.
So the internalization of the relationship is what matters, right? And that's also when you think about how that works in religious practices that are related to guru yoga, right? So if I have an idealized guru, Jesus, Rama, particularly if there's stories, if you were raised with stories in the imagination when you were young,
Yeah.
and you were raised in an environment where those stories were real for you, to the extent that you could develop a relationship with one of those characters, even though it was in your imagination, that would be enough and to the extent that you lived in your imagination as a kid, you might develop a strong sense of security and attunement, right? In Jesus, right? Particularly in this culture, there's a lot of that. And if it's done well, then essentially that is like the perfect internalized figure, because it's the Son of God, and you have this, you can take refuge then in that internal representation, right? So it's how it's internalized at the end that matters. And contemplative traditions have used that significantly as part of kind of priming the whole stack and softening and working on some of this healing of this younger material. From that experience of being seen, develops like self-esteem, value, but also more important, your GPS system, because you know what it is that you like and what you don't like. And this is actually, and this even gets into the cognitive dimension to it, because to the extent then that if I'm your good daddy, or you're my good daddy, to the extent that you ask me questions about yourself, or about myself, right? So to the extent that you say, John, how did you feel about today? By asking me that, you force me to reflect,
The internal,
to develop that capacity for the mind to make a perspective back on itself. That isn't innate necessarily. So the ability to think about yourself in such a way that you know what you like and what you don't like, and to have an internal dialogue with yourself in such a way that you can make decisions about what you like and what you don't like. If that wasn't given to you by a parent who was interested enough to elicit, then you're not going to necessarily even be able to have those kinds of cognitions.
I'm really connecting to I think the real problem is that we aren't taught to hold loving space for someone else to authentically come into their own awareness. Like there's a lot of like talking to, coaching, telling, but there seems like a skill gap that we missed around just being able to mirror and reflect.
Well, that's you said the mirroring that goes all the way back, and you can't get it.
Yeah.
You can't work out. Well, mirroring would be, and it's not an easy skill.
But is it an evolutionary skill? Is it a skill that we are now developing as a result of the times we're in, and not something that because it feels so fundamental to our well-being, and that's why it kind of shocks me that it's something that we have to spend so much time to learn or maybe unlearn. And so I'm curious, I
think that might be part of cultural language structures. Like I don't know enough about how other cultures reflect upon one another. What I do believe, though, is that that level of thought, which is to mirror back without interfering, is actually pretty sophisticated and comes online beyond third-person perspective. Third-person perspective is like, what you're describing is basically like third-person perspective, where you look at everything as an object, as a problem, as a solution. Sorry, and looking for a solution, even in your relationship, right? Where all the other person wants is to be mirrored and to be like, oh, you're feeling anxious, John. Right? I mean, I even had a discussion this morning with my wife around this. She was like, just mirror me. Right? Because of course there's a tendency to want to go in and fix, but project. Actually, yeah.
There's a obsession with the projection, and to project. And this comes back to even like if I have that wound of not feeling seen, not feeling valued, not feeling worthy.
Sure.
And you're in front of me, and you're somebody who needs help. I'm going to project versus mirror, because for some reason I've learned that is more valuable. So maybe it is like a belief.
And also you've learned that you're valued in being instrumental like that, not valued in just because when you reflect, as long as you don't do it as an annoying strategy, do you know what I mean? Actually, it's got nothing to do with you.
Totally.
So you're just like, I see you.
Yeah.
I see you. You're going through a hard time right now. You know?
I really feel like that's like the medicine of this era right now. It's like being able to just do that for each other. Like beyond it, sure, there's going to be needs for guides and sure, yes, but like I feel like we've just forgotten the base hit of just this incredible medicine that I can get from my fellow man and woman. Of just being recognized for being. Like just not even recognized, just honoring my experience. You know? Like
it's related to like what does it mean to be a friend? Like a lot of what I think of the contemplative practice and spiritual path, really what we're asked to do at this time is learn how to be a friend, which is interesting because in many of the traditions, the mystical teachers referred to as the friend. Like in Sufism, the friend, right? Or in Mahayana Buddhism, the friend. It's actually the right archetype for our time because it's a way of actually teaching without having to be a teacher, right? It's just teaching by being a good human being with one another. And if that can spread, right? And what you're pointing to is by reflecting back, you're doing a lot of healing there.
Oh, man.
By like, oh, yeah, I feel, thank you. That is what's happening. You know, and maybe the reason why there's such a need for it is because we have a huge deficiency of that in our, in our culture.
Totally.
That we aren't seeing.
It feels like the thing that every single person I seem to connect with, I think this is like the thing I see now, and it's the thing I try my best to give everybody, whether I know them or not, just because I am assuming that they are deficient in this critical piece of just coming together. I look at the divisiveness that we're in right now. It's just a lack of being able to see everything for what it is, which is the truth.
That's right.
You're a beautiful human being with a heart, who came from a mother and a father who. That's right. It's like there's a shared nature of our humanity.
Yes.
That isn't recognized and seen.
Well, that deep humanity, that really is where the sacred comes from. It's not actually higher up the stack. It's lower. Like it's It's innate. It's our, like, the sacred animal, right? The sacred the sacred plant, right? Basic human goodness. Yeah. You're no, I'm with you.
Oh no, I figured you'd be with me. I mean,
Yeah.
like, it's just like the nature of your. This is why I'm so grateful for the work you do and the way that you understand these different dynamics. Because I think I feel, and I've met so many teachers that are so like mastered in so many different dimensions and disciplines, and you're one of the few that I've met and that have just such an embodied understanding of how all of these different systems work together.
We weren't given a manual on what it means, on like how to be a human being. And you're right. We live at a time. We live at a time where you walk into the supermarket and there's 100 tomato soups, right? There's 100 different disciplines that you could master, but like, what is it? What is this? What is the central system from which all of those other specialties can come out of? Because that's what we need to learn. That's like, I want to go back to what we're talking about.
What are we talking about?
I said, well, it's the internalization of these things that matters. And the reason why that's so important is, if you understand that, then a significant amount of the healing can happen. You can control that. And what I mean by that is most of us have experienced moments of being seen. So, for instance, if I said to you, do you remember a moment in your life when you really felt seen for something? Do you have an instance that comes to mind?
Yeah, I do.
How would you describe it?
It brought me to tears. I mean, it was simple.
How would you describe it in your body?
It felt just like a deep relaxation that I don't think I can access through anything else.
Can you remember it right now?
I mean, I have a few that come to mind right now.
So to the extent that you can remember it right now.
I can remember it very vividly. I mean, I can speak to, I mean...
Well, so the point is there you when you remember it, you invoke the feeling. Right? Like, it's there. Okay. So that's the meditation object. So the first thing is if you remember the feeling. Now the problem is well, there's a number of ways of doing this, but like, so if I said to you right now, okay, remember that feeling, what would you need to do right now? What could you do in your experience to turn the volume up on that feeling a little bit?
I mean, right now what I'm doing is I'm putting my awareness on where I feel it in my body, and I'm allowing it.
So if you allow it, can it just grow a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's an expansion down. There's an expansion out.
You
could feel a field of. It feels like a prayer field.
Beautiful. So then the practice for you would be to track, to what extent do you remember that feeling during the day? So what you have to do is we would need to fuse that feeling with your self-structure. Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
So the one practice that you do is on the meditation cushion, so to speak, is you learn to like bring that experience up and turn the volume up as loud as the volume can go on that, right? That'd be step one. Step two is, well, how fast could you re-invoke it? Right? How fast could you bring it all the way up? And then, to what extent can you stay in relationship with that feeling? So one of the metacognitive skills that you would then need to develop is, during the day, track on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being like in the video game where your fuel is all the way up. To what extent in any moment is it going down? So that reflective capacity has to be built. That's the question that you didn't get asked. How are you feeling right now? So to the extent that I said, okay, Raj, today, I want you to try and remember to reflect upon that feeling constantly. Like I gave you a candle and I said, Raj, I want you to carry this candle through the day with you. And just wherever you go, carry the glass of water. Don't forget it. Go to your business meeting with a glass of water. Don't forget it. See if you can stay in relationship with that. And because of neuroplasticity, right? Because of neuroplasticity, to the extent that you would do that, within a few months, year, then it's become a part of you because you were tracking it. And for many people, the problem is that they don't realize when it goes 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and then you recognize it when it's at 2 because you feel so crappy about yourself, right? So the thing is to
increase the baseline.
To increase the baseline, and you do that by tracking it as a practice. Right? And it's not enough to just go to therapy and have someone sit there and say, oh, Raj, it's so good to see you. How are you doing? And you, right? But to the extent that you can remember that feeling, remember that relationship. And there's all kinds of ways of doing that, whether you're working with like archetypal figures, like kind of Buddha's visualized ideal Buddha figures, so to speak. So visualizing ideal mentor figures or ideal, and then kind of remembering that person during the day, like remembering what it would be like to have like the ideal father just kind of hang out with you, right? So some people can use their imagination like that, which is like having an invisible friend. Others, it's like, well, I'm just going to work purely with the feeling, right? So feeling safe in relationship to somebody, you can also invoke that with your imagination.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, that's so empowering.
Attunement. You can remember what it feels like to feel felt deeply. It's like, oh yeah. So the issue then is learning to cultivate those states and make those states traits.
Mm-hmm. The integration. Right? So it's like the peak experiences, whether it's a moment of bliss or a medicine ceremony or whatever the thing might be, a kind moment with a friend or a family. Mm-hmm. It's to anchor in the feeling.
Yes.
And then to associate that feeling with a practice.
Well, first thing is most of these are relational experiences. So it's remembering a relational experience, A, or B, generating the ideal relational experience. Because the thing about the brain mind doesn't know the difference between what you imagine to be real and what's real, right? So essentially, you create in the meditative state the ideal situation. You allow yourself to experience that first and second person. Like, what is it like to be in the presence of that being? What does it feel like to be in the presence of a being that is like, that you feel deeply safe, you feel deeply attuned, you feel like they're feeling you, you feel seen, they're radiating infinite love. So and then like you learn to develop that. And then the second phase is you learn to bring that inside of you and essentially become that. And that's like, believe it or not, that's like one of the fundamental practices in Tibetan Buddhism. Because if you do that practice for like a few years, on a very deep level, the mummy daddy stuff will just get taken care of, because essentially you're repeating, oh, look, there's my good daddy. I become the good daddy. That's actually how we actually grow, right? So it's easy to do it in relationship, even easier to do it with idealized figures, which is why, as I said, in India, they project it onto the guru, but actually it shouldn't be done. The guru is meant to give it back. But the oldest trick in the book is not to give it back. And then, of course, the person is in adoration of you. And often what happens then is this is when actually the teacher, the guru, then actually is fed by, and they begin to like have a glow, and then more people come and they feed them with more adoration, and then you get these amazing field effects and like the blessing of the guru. But actually what's happening is the blessing from all of the followers.
It's a collective coherent
It's a collective
field
that's being fed back to them.
Yeah.
Right? So the way, what we need to do is get to a level of understanding that whole process consciously. Because then you can work with conscious projection. Because the truth is, we're always projecting. And if you know that you're always projecting, then you can make projection an aesthetic, artistic experience of enjoying. But you only can do that if you're also realizing that you're also projecting onto yourself as well. Like, who are you? Who am I? Who's seeing who? So that's where the contemplative sciences, if you will, intersect with the psychodynamic and the healing piece. Because whilst therapy is super important, if you can internalize the therapist,
yeah,
right?
I totally know what you mean.
You know what I'm saying? Then it's like, then you can, like, if you can sit down and shut your eyes and go, oh,
John, this is like my entire mission, man. That's why I feel so much alignment with you, because I really feel this shared belief and knowing, forget belief, gnosis of this possibility for everybody.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the truth is that these skills can be democratized. Is that the right word? Like,
They can be like
they can be scaled
infinitely,
because it's really what we're talking about is psychoeducation. There's significant amount of work that can happen through psychoeducation. There's always going to be the need for therapy, but the truth is we're not going to have enough therapists for everybody.
No.
But I think 90% of the suffering on the planet can be addressed by experiential psychoeducation. It's not enough to just be educated. You have to be experientially educated and taught like how to access these systems inside of ourselves. And actually, this goes all the way up the stack. So actually, we could say even the deepest states of non-dual realization, they actually work the same way. They're not a mystery. It's exactly the same kind, just the same kind of like matter of fact. Well, this is how this level works, and this is what it does. It's true for every single stage. And actually, what we've discovered is that the highest stages are dependent upon cleaning out the lowest ones.
Totally, yeah. Otherwise, you're just projecting from a dirty fishbowl.
Yeah,
as opposed to it
being
right. clear and clean and connected to the intelligence then that can help us shift the way that the world is.
That's right. Yeah, in many of the traditions, they would talk about the kind of the spiritual essence as being the infant consciousness, and that's because literally it functions as an infant, because that level of our being, if there's a level of our being that doesn't function in time, it's timeless. So that level of our being isn't fused to the attentional system. So the attentional system is the part of us that's like, what's going on here? And to the extent that we're fused with that, we lose the direct experience of our fundamental essence. And the reason that happens is because of these developmental traumas. If we don't feel safe, we're going to hold on to the attentional system to try and find safety. To the extent that we feel fundamentally safe at the root, the attentional system softens and it opens up. It opens up into like the fundamental innocence and the not knowingness of like true nature. So there's a really deep relationship there between early childhood, trauma, developmental trauma, what the Christians would call original sin. Like the original sin, if you will, is that inherited trauma that we haven't managed to clean up.
Oh, John, you are like a breath of fresh air, man.
Thank you.
I really, again, just appreciate the simplicity with which you explain such dense and complex phenomena that is so interconnected, so interdimensional.
Sure.
And to bring it back into frameworks and a way of thinking about the entire biology and the psychology is stunning.
Well, and so this is the importance of psychoeducation. This is why Nicole, my wife, and I developed the training program that we have, because there's a way of addressing all of who we are, of understanding all of who we are. But you're not going to get that in a weekend workshop.
No.
So I think that the other thing for folks to understand is like, reflect upon the level of growth between, let's say, 4 and 18. Massive amounts of growth, right? Okay. Then reflect upon the level of growth between 20, what is it, like 20 and 30. Not so much. Maybe some, but not like the world. You grew through different worlds as a kid, right? And that's because there's certain kind of growth that's facilitated in those growth environments, which was basically school, over a period of years. So right now, there's places that we can go to learn, workshops or training programs, but generally they're only providing the kind of growth that can happen for an adult within the amount of time that's possible. So in a weekend workshop, that's not the kind of growth that I'm interested in. Like, to really get a sense of how you grow as a human being, you need a year, at least a year, or 2 years or 3 years, but that's then it's like, oh, this is how it unfolds. There's a lot you can clean up at the beginning very quickly. Not a lot, but you can clean. It's like, oh my gosh. But then these deeper things, they take time.
Yeah.
They take a community. They take like some theoretical understanding. Like, your mind has to understand this stuff cognitively, because that's like, without
The gatekeeper.
Yeah, like without your mind actually investing itself,
Totally.
it's not going to work.
Totally. Yep. Same
Which
page.
is also why, let's say, psychedelics or state experiences are very helpful, but in the long run they don't actually provide for growth, because the truth is, real development does involve some cognitive internalization of new perspectives and new capacities that you can't have from just having experiences.
No. And you can try going to experience after experience after experience, but you're just swimming in the same level of consciousness unless you integrate the insight.
That's right. So you have to appreciate that structures of consciousness are not the same thing as states. Now, states can be used particularly for healing because they can open up the basement. So it's not to say that it's not useful, but actual development, it doesn't work through states. You need to learn to consciously, there's no amount of ayahuasca experience that's going to get a 4-year-old to become an 18-year-old. You have to go through concrete operational thinking, formal operational thinking, even post-formal operational thinking. And thinking here doesn't just mean like thinking, it means perspective taking. Like, what perspective should I take on this experience? So that, as I said, the real challenge in our culture is developmental. People understand that actually there's as many stages above where they are right now as there are stages that they went through from 0 to 18. Right? And that those are real structures, and that actually you can unfold through those in a lifetime. If, on the other hand, but we have to approach it the right way. Right? We have to understand, like, what's the value of psychedelic experiences? Like, we work with psychedelics, but they're useful at a certain point. Meditative work, where does that fit in? Where does the psychodynamic healing fit in? And then having the kind of the maps, like, to really, the developmental maps, because when you start thinking developmentally, that's psychoactive. Like, most adults, we don't remember what it was like when you and I were kind of like in a magical world and suddenly we became rational, right? That was a world shift. So a comparable world shift is an adult shifting into a developmental perspective, because suddenly, not only do you see yourself in that light, you see the whole world, all the populations, you see what's going on politically, what's going on in geopolitics, what's going on in the planet itself from a developmental perspective. And that's invaluable. And we're not going to evolve out of the current meta crisis without a meta perspective.
Yeah. John, I think this is a beautiful segue into you sharing about your program and your curriculum, because I think you touched on a lot of different elements of it, but I'm curious if you could like put it into what it is that you guide people through and
Mm-hmm.
what that experience is like. And for anybody who's interested, who'd want to learn more, I'd love for you to share information. I mean, this is like, truly, I feel and I see and I can really trust
Mm-hmm.
the mastery and the care and the attunement and the understanding that weaves all this together. So
Yeah, thank you.
yeah.
Well, first, to recognize that what we're talking about is the integration of kind of psychodynamic and developmental psychology with the power of the contemplative traditions, right? So in that sense, both East and West, these are dharmas, like dharma meaning truth. So our approach we call planetary dharma, because really what we're pointing to is this is a time in history where not only have we worked on, let's say, integrating the best of Eastern practices and Eastern psychology, because that itself, there's no one Buddhism, there's no one yoga. That has to be synthesized. And then you synthesize the best of Western psychology, like where does Reichian, Jungian, Freudian, cognitive, that gets synthesized. And then you synthesize those two. So that then is essentially a planetary dharma. So our training program it's like a 4-year program, but people can come in and just do the first year. There's no, like, you don't have to commit to the whole 4-year process, if you will. But essentially what we do is we kind of give you an orientation to what's happening on the planet developmentally, because the kind of process that our listeners are going through, the likelihood is that this is probably the first time in their ancestral line that they're asking themselves these questions, right? Like there's a change happening. So there's a planetary context for that developmentally. Like we're at a certain, if we shift out of just the individual perspective and we shift to like what's going on the planet, that there's a process. So getting a sense of how the sacred relates to the planet itself and an evolutionary process, and then kind of giving you a sense of the maps experientially. So kind of teaching you about the inner cartography and levels of development through states and stages. We work with some of Ken Wilber's material in terms of orientation. And then we go do a deep dive into understanding this process of multi-generational trauma, both theoretically and then experientially, because really understanding that that's what's happening individually, and that's what's happening, that's what's causing the wars and the suffering and addiction. It all comes down to the single process. So once your eyes are open to that, and then we do a deep dive into working with attachment, understanding it, and then developing the kind of the exercises to begin to heal that, developing a contemplative practice that really addresses that. Mm-hmm. So not only are we teaching like core kind of contemplative skills, how to stabilize your mind, how to develop attentional capacity, like how to develop some of these altered states, but we're working with the attachment work in doing that. So it's deeply grounding. We're kind of awakening, if you will, through embodiment and through healing rather than through leaving, kind of going up. And then we have, for instance, like a 5-day retreat within the first 6-month module. Cool. And then in that 5-day retreat, that's a deep dive into these practices so that you really are learning to develop a solid contemplative healing practice. And so that like that first module then orients people to practice. And then as we move from there, for instance, we work on with wisdom practices. So essentially these are practices to like open up the experience of the unified field. But how do you keep that connected with the self? So it isn't like you're blasting somebody open. So wisdom practices that open into the unified field, that open into non-duality. And then essentially what we're doing developmentally is helping people mature into a new level of development, which in the traditions they would call a bodhisattva. Mm-hmm. So by bodhisattva, we mean a level of development where all these pieces become integrated, and then you're beginning to orient to how do you really, really show up in the world. So there's a cleaning up dimension to it. This is like healing, cleaning up the past. There's an waking up dimension, like awakening to your spiritual, non-dual, essential being There's a growing up dimension that's got to do with new structures of consciousness, and then really kind of opening up that capacity and then learning to really show up in the world. And the Bodhisattva path is really about engaging in the story of our time in such a way that synchronicity really becomes a way of living. When all these technologies are brought, together, it begins to create a magic.
Wow. Yeah.
So it's a little
No,
sense.
this is great. So it's a 4-year program. People can come in and take modules at a time.
Yes.
And the retreats are in Boulder?
The first cycle of the retreats are online because we want people to just feel to kind of like get level of commitment. And then further on, yes, the retreats happen online. So like the first 6 months is kind of like people can do it.
Yeah.
Because it's for people to fly into Boulder, that's a level of commitment. We have students who fly in from Australia to Boulder. So I want people to come when they're like, coming. Yeah, it's like, okay, I've done 6 months with you guys. This is good. And then we kind of come together.
Totally. And when does the next cohort class
In January.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, we'll make sure all the links are available in the show notes for anybody listening. And are you available on social? I think you are, right? Planetary
Dharma, what, on Instagram?
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of.
Okay,
I'm learning.
Totally. Well, we'll make all of your contact. The best way to go to find out more about this is the website.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So we'll make sure all that stuff is available. John, truly.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
You are just such a brilliant mind. Truly one of the more brilliant minds I've met on this path in this work. So I just want to thank you for doing so much of it yourself and for sharing yourself so openly. I have a last final question for you.
Yes.
In the midst of everything you're doing, everywhere you've been and everywhere you're going, how do you stay grounded? But more importantly, what's one thing you've done consistently to become a more grounded human being?
To really appreciate that the earth itself, that matter is spirit, and that form is emptiness. So we work a lot with this in our trainings, but the experience relying upon actually Mother Earth and gravity to pull me into openness. So to pull me into the body, to pull me into what's going on right here, but also to also open me up. Yeah. So when I feel safe, when I feel grounded with Mother, and matter's always right here.
So good.
Yeah.
Brilliant, John. Well, again, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah.
And for just being.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Everybody, that's a wrap for this week's episode of Stay Grounded. I'm your host, Raj. This is your new friend, John. And from us, stay grounded.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into this week's episode of Stay Grounded. No matter where you're from or what you're going through, I hope it helps you remember just how incredible you are and have always been. If you're on a path of emotional healing or self-discovery and would like to learn how Liberate can support your journey, head to www.rajjana.com/liberate. That is LIBER8 to learn more about our current group programs and one-on-one offerings. I love you guys, and I'll see you next week.